Hello, everybody. For those of you who are still joining or have just joined already, do let us know where you're from. Write your comments in the box. And welcome to today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about preparing your students online for Cambridge English qualifications. And we're going to be focusing particularly on the speaking papers. Okay. So as I said, my name's Donya Estafanos. I work for Cambridge Assessment English, based in Cambridge, and my role is exam support manager. So what that means is I create resources for teachers, for parents, for students, to help you prepare and be confident when taking up the Cambridge English exams. So due to the current climate, we're delivering the webinar to you in a slightly different way to usual. Like most of you, we're working from home, but we're aiming to give you the best experience we can. And we're relying on home Wi-Fi, so please do bear with us if we have any issues. So before we start, I'd just like to give you a few suggestions so that you can get the most out of today's session, okay? So we recommend that you wear headphones to get a better quality audio and to be able to hear better. Try not to have anything else running, especially Skype, and switch off any other programs if you can. Don't worry if the picture is a little bit blurry at first. That's probably just due to live streaming, and it should hopefully improve as we go along. And during the webinar, you'll need to be able to use the chat box on the right of the screen. Lots of you are already using it to say hello, so that's fantastic. And please do use the chat box if you want to type any comments or questions. If it's something that we can answer straight away, we'll type an answer to you. But we will be keeping some questions for the Q&A session at the end. So don't worry if your question isn't answered straight away. And we'll ask you to use the chat box for activities during the session. So it's a good idea to keep it visible. We will be giving out certificates at the end of the webinar. The certificate, as well as the slides and a link to the recording, will be sent to you after the webinar, okay? So the webinar will be recorded and you will be able to access everything after the webinar in case you miss anything. All right? So on that note, let's get started. Okay, so as I've already explained in this webinar, we're going to be looking at preparing your students for speaking for the Cambridge English exams. So to begin with, we're going to look at your current situation and hear about some of the challenges that you might be facing teaching your students online. We're going to try to group those challenges and provide 4 main principles for you to consider when teaching your online classes that you can take away with you and help to support you in teaching your classes. And of course, we'll be looking at practical ways that you can apply those principles, and I'll be sharing lots of resources that we have to help you teach your classes. And as part of these resources, these include brand new lesson plans that we've created in response to this situation to help you teach your students online. And I'll be giving you more information about those later on in the webinar. So we're going to start with the first section, and that's looking at your current situation, at your context. So obviously, depending on where you're based in the world, you'll be at different stages of this lockdown, of this situation. But something that we all have in common is that we've all been teaching online probably for at least a month now. And so there's an assumption in this webinar that by now you have gotten to grips with the platform that you're using to teach your students online. So either you've chosen this platform yourself or you've been told which platform to use by your school or institution. So hopefully you've got to grips now and you've practiced enough and you know how to use your platform well. So on that note, I'd like to start with telling you what this webinar is not. Okay, so it's not going to be a step-by-step guide to using lots of different digital tools in your classroom, because there are so many fantastic resources that already exist to explain all of these tools. And from what we've heard from you, there's so much information to go through that you have been spending a lot of time trying to work through those materials. So we don't want to add to that load, okay? So I will be referring to some tools that you can use in your classes, but this webinar is really about going back to basics, okay? We're going back to basics and looking at the skills and the language that your students need to develop in order to do really well in their Cambridge English speaking exams. So we'll be looking at how we as teachers, despite getting used to a new environment, can ensure we're still developing useful, practical, and engaging lessons to support our students through this time. Okay? So as I said, we're going to start by looking at your current situation and your context. So I'm going to present to you some different feelings and opinions that we have heard from teachers. I'm going to show you 4 different ones, and I'd like you to read them, okay? So here is teacher 1. Take a moment to read it. Okay, so this teacher's talking about getting less done in their online classes than maybe they did when they were teaching face-to-face. Teacher 2. Okay, so talking about motivation, maybe your students are feeling a bit less motivated, they get tired. Teacher 3. Okay, so this teacher's talking about experimenting with lots of new digital tools, finding it a little bit overwhelming. Teaching speaking is difficult online. And teacher 4. So teacher 4 is talking about monitoring students, finding it hard to monitor without being in the physical classroom with students, and giving feedback, very important. Okay, so these are 4 different opinions and feelings. Now, what about you? How are you feeling about this situation? Can you identify with any of these teachers? If so, you can, a lot of you are doing already, you're writing teacher 1, I agree, teacher 2, I agree. Brilliant. And are there any other feelings that you have that haven't been mentioned here? How are you finding teaching online, and specifically teaching speaking online? Let's have a look at some of your responses. I'm a little bit of all of them. Okay. Okay. I agree with all of them. Oh, one teacher says, I actually get more done because I find my students are more focused. Wow, maybe you can share some tips with us, how you manage that. Okay. Lots of agreeing with these teachers, it's very challenging. Monitoring, finding time to plan. Okay, somebody's written here, lots of teacher talking. Another common challenge that we've been hearing a lot from teachers. Okay, so I have tried to summarize here some of the main challenges, and I think actually reading your comments, you've covered, it looks like you agree with me, which is a good start. We all seem to be having quite similar challenges. So setting up activities, managing interaction, monitoring, fulfilling lesson aims and not getting through your whole plan. Progress is another one. Students talking over one another. Aha, that's very interesting. How can we get over that? Okay, so it's important to think about the challenges that we're having as teachers so that we can really find ways to address these challenges and overcome them to support our students in class, and also to help manage the stress for teachers, because it can be quite stressful if you feel as though you're not doing a very good job, as good as maybe you do in a face-to-face classroom. And it is important to realise that, unlike in a face-to-face classroom where language is really the main focus, teaching online presents other areas that can really contribute to the mental challenge that our students are facing. So just learning how to use new tools and new apps and a new platform, checking if your audio is working. Students have to really concentrate hard to listen to their teacher and understand what they have to do, because they're not getting the body language and the facial expressions, those unspoken cues that they would get in a face-to-face classroom, making it a bit more difficult, a bit more challenging. Okay. So as I said, we've looked at some of the challenges, but what can we do to overcome them? How can we help ourselves with our classes and support our learners? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to present to you 4 main principles, okay? And these principles should cover most of the challenges, if not all of the challenges that we've discussed. All right. So the 4 principles are as follows. Number 1, lighten the cognitive load. Number 2, keep it simple. Number 3, provide opportunities for interaction and personalization. Number 4, give feedback. Okay, so these are the 4 principles that you're going to take from this webinar. And I can imagine you're sitting there thinking, yes, of course, these are very good principles, these are very good ideas, but how can we achieve these? Okay, so we're going to look at each one in a little bit more detail and look at how we can achieve these principles. Okay. So the first principle is lighten the cognitive load. Before we look at how we can lighten the cognitive load, I'd like to hear your opinion. Do you agree that this is a good idea? Does online teaching present a much higher cognitive load on our students? Do you agree, or do you disagree, or maybe you just don't know? So answer in the poll now. Does online teaching present a higher cognitive load on our students? Okay, so looking at the results, we have about 80% agree, about 7% don't agree, and the rest of you don't know. Okay, interesting. Oh, it's going up slightly. Just over 70% of you agree. Okay, and lots of comments as well. Higher, but maybe not much higher. Okay, interesting. I think really what we have to consider is our students now are having to multitask. They're not in the classroom looking at the teacher, focusing on a language point. They have to focus at different parts of the screen, looking at different students. They have to click maybe to open a document or navigate through resources that a teacher has uploaded onto a platform. As I already mentioned, really focus on understanding what the teacher's saying, because they don't have those non-spoken cues. And so there's actually much more now to learning rather than just learning English. It's all about everything else in the environment that maybe we don't have control of. Okay. Of course, that does depend on your students. If some of your students are really high level and really technically able, it's going to affect them less. Okay, so these conditions will affect students to different degrees depending on their level and their technological abilities. Okay, so we need to lighten that load. We need to control the environment as much as we can. So the first one sounds very simple, is just empathize with your students, okay? You know, I think show students that you understand that it's difficult, that you know it's not the same, that it's different, and it in some ways might be harder. I think empathy can go a long way, and if students see that you understand how they're feeling, that can help you and the students connect a bit more. Okay, and scaffold activities. What do I mean by scaffold activities? So it's really important to look at a task and break it down into simple and manageable steps. So we're going to look in more detail later at exactly how we can do this, but it's about looking at a task and breaking it into small steps to help students every step of the way so that they can keep up and they can feel perhaps a bit less challenged and more supported throughout the class. So varying the length of interactions. Now, again, this is something that you need to think about in your face-to-face class as well. But I suppose one thing that's different online is you're thinking about how you set up activities. If you have an activity that requires students to go into a breakout room and discuss something, think about how long it takes to explain that and to set that up versus how long the actual activity is going to take. If it takes you 5 minutes to explain and set up the breakout rooms and send all the materials, and then you only want them to talk for 1 minute, then is it really worth it? Is that just a little bit complicated for what you're trying to achieve? At the same time, you don't want to have tasks that are really long and students get a bit bored and disengaged. Again, just like you would in a face-to-face classroom. So it's really thinking about balancing what you want them to do and how long you want them to do it for. Now, the next point, I have blanked out some words. Can you guess what words should go underneath that blue box? So include beep on the board as well as spoken instructions. Include what on the board as well as spoken instructions? What do you think should go under here? Type your answers in the chat box. Written, pictures, images, symbols, clues. Oh, these are very good ideas. Objectives, visual aids, prompts, cues, graphics. Okay, actually, these are really excellent ideas. Mine is very simple, written instructions. So if a teacher's given instructions orally and your mum or dad comes into the room and starts hoovering, or they come and make a cup of tea and all of a sudden the students missed what the teacher is saying and then they're behind, and in a physical classroom they might say to their friend, what did the teacher say? What did I miss? Which is much more difficult online. So it's really important, again, that we support them as much as we can, that we give them prompts, that we lighten the cognitive load. So we give the oral instruction and we also write the instruction on the board. But I love the ideas that you came up with using an image. That's a great idea, or a cue, or keywords, phrases, really good ideas. Anything that you can do to support your students. I suppose, I mean, thinking about this webinar, imagine if I was giving this webinar without anything on the slides. It would be much more difficult for you to concentrate on what I'm saying. And that same principle applies in the classroom with our students. Okay. And then finally, we have set tasks that students can take students away from their screens. So if possible, and again, this is linked to varying the length of interactions and varying interactions in general, actually. Is there anything you can do that takes the students away from the screen? Because as you all know, looking into the computer hours at a time is really exhausting. Are there tasks that you can give them that gives them time away from the screen where they can leave the meeting for a little bit and come back on? And finally, again, relating to lightening the cognitive load, supporting students, let students know what's coming up next. What are you going to do in the next lesson? What are you going to cover? Then those of them that want to prepare can. Maybe they won't all do that, but those who take responsibility for their own learning or feel like they're behind, they have that opportunity to keep up. So again, it's all about supporting our students. So that is principle number 1. Principle number 2. Keep it simple. So again, I've blanked out a word. Adapt, don't, beep. What do you think that word should be? What do you think that word should be? Bearing in mind the principle is keep it simple. Don't panic, okay? Good idea. That's very true. You shouldn't panic. Just relax. Adapt. Don't stress. Don't worry. Okay. Don't complicate. Okay. Lots of very nice ideas. Don't go nuts. Don't rush. Okay. So what I've come up with is don't reinvent. Okay. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to show you all of these points together. So I think with teaching online, you can feel pressure to use all the digital tools that are available, use every function on your platform, because there's this idea, I'm teaching online, I have to change everything that I'm doing, I have to do it in a new way, I have to use technology, I have to adapt. And yes, in some ways you do have to adapt, but you don't have to change everything you do and the way that you do everything, okay? Keep it simple. Take a step back, think about what's really going to be the most useful way of delivering this task, giving students this task, okay? What's going to give them the best chance of developing and practicing their language that they need to improve their speaking? Perhaps you have found this amazing digital tool that you like to use, and that's the best way. Fantastic. But if actually you think, I don't think that is the best way, I'm just going to step back and do what I do in the face-to-face classroom, absolutely do that, okay? The focus is on how can I support my students develop their language, not how can I fit in 100 new digital tools into my class, okay? And I think we've all done it. At the beginning, we panicked and tried to read up everything we could about every new online tool. And now that we've done that, we can think, right, what's actually useful for our students? Okay. So, principle number 3, provide opportunities for personalization and interaction. Provide opportunities for interaction and personalization. So again, we need to motivate our students. Lots of you have said your students maybe are a bit less motivated. They find studying online a bit more difficult. So how can we motivate them? How can we build their confidence? How can we encourage them to be part of the lessons, to be part of the learning? So what choices can we give them? Can we involve them in the material that we're using in the classrooms? We're talking about speaking today, so maybe you can ask them to prepare a small talk about something that they are interested in. You can ask them to bring a picture that means something to them that they can talk about. If you're doing a reading lesson, you could ask them to bring an article that they have read and they have enjoyed. Okay, so it's about motivating them, bringing them into the classes and ensuring that they feel part of the lesson. Okay, building their confidence. And of course, creating opportunities for interaction, which doesn't always involve you. So another challenge that we've heard lots about is how can these classes be less teacher-centered? How can it, I mean, at the moment, you're all looking at me and I'm talking for the whole time. In your classes, how can you change that balance? How can you ensure that your students are talking to each other more, that they're doing something without you, so you can take a step back and monitor? So one way is to give students, lots of you are saying breakout rooms, yes. Blended learning, good. Lots of praise, absolutely. Praise is really important. Pair work, aha, yes. So setting activities where students have to work together. So giving them a reason to talk to each other and a reason to listen to each other is very important. Let's go on to the next principle. Feedback, aha. So another challenge for you. What's under my blue rectangle? Find ways to give something feedback. Find ways to give something feedback. Okay, positive, constructive, very good, okay. Sensible feedback, yes. Instant, an interesting one. Constructive is coming up a lot. Of course, you always want your feedback to be constructive so that it can help students improve rather than just criticize or praise. Absolutely. Aha, I think I've spotted somebody who got my answer. Meaningful feedback. Okay, meaningful. So yeah, relating to what you're saying, you can see on my slide I have a thumbs up and a thumbs down. And actually lots of platforms do have that function where you can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a like. And that's very nice for an immediate response, either from the teacher to the students or to each other. But how can you go further than that? How can you give them specific feedback, individual feedback? Because that's important in order to motivate students to do better, and in order for students to have goals and know what they need to work towards. So that's an important one. And also encouraging peer feedback, again, taking away from the teacher. And students learn so much from each other. They learn from each other's language, and if they're able to spot errors or things that are good in their peers' language, that can really help them improve. And as always, make time for students to ask questions. Always welcome questions and ensure that students are comfortable to ask questions. No question is a bad question, okay? Right. So to just summarize that section before we move on, these are the 4 principles that I want you to remember. Okay, I'm going to check if you remember them at the end. So we've looked at these principles, and now what do we do with those principles? What do we do with them? How do we apply those to our classrooms? So in the next section, we're going to look at some ideas, some practical ideas that you can use in your classrooms that will help you to apply these principles. Okay. So rather then starting from a point of, I'm teaching online, I need to change everything I do. Let's start from the point of, I'm a teacher, I have students who are preparing for the B1 preliminary for schools exam, speaking. What do they need to do? What do I need to teach them? So here I have shown you a speaking task from the B1 preliminary for schools exam, and this is a part 2. I'd like you just to take a few moments and look at the task and read the questions in purple to the right and consider these questions. What do learners have to do in this task, and what language skills do they need to develop? This is the first thing that we need to answer as teachers before we can plan our classes. What do learners have to do in this task? You can type your answers in the chat box. So this is for B1 preliminary for schools, speaking part 2. Aha. Okay. Let's have a look. Very good. So they need to describe a photograph, and they're going to talk for about 1 minute, and they talk on their own, so it's individual. So the skills and the language that they need, that we need to help them develop, they need to have a range of vocabulary to be able to describe the pictures. They need to know adjectives to give those descriptions, but that's not enough. They need to be able to vocalize those, to order their ideas. And if they don't know what something is in a picture, they need to be able to paraphrase, to explain what it is. Okay? So these are all really important skills that we need to teach our students. Would you just give this task to your student at the beginning of the class and say, this is the task, do it, go? Yes, no? I mean, it's rare that we would do this, that we would just present this task and say, do it, because that would be really difficult. Lots of no's. Good, I'm glad you're saying no. No way. It would be much too difficult. They wouldn't know where to start, okay? So it's important that the stages are broken down. The only time you might do that is at the end of a course, if you're doing a practice test and you want to assess what they've learned, if they can do this task, or even at the beginning of a course, if you want to use it as a diagnostic to see what your students know, and that can help you plan your course. But generally, you wouldn't just present a task like this to students. I'm seeing the key word there, scaffold. Excellent. We need to build in stages into our lessons that develop and practice these skills so that by the end they're able to do this task. Okay, so we're going to look at a few ways that we can do this. So here I'm just showing you something that I've done before the lesson. So again, helping our students prepare, especially those students who feel the online lessons are a bit more difficult. What information can we give them before the lesson? So here you can see I've just posted on our platform, on our forum. Hi class, this week we're going to be focusing on how to describe a picture. Okay. And I've posted a link here to an example so they can watch that if they want. Now, I think one thing to consider if you're doing this is the task that you're setting can't be compulsory, because if you start the class and students need to have done a task before that they haven't done, they're going to be at a disadvantage in the lesson. And the point of this isn't to put anybody at a disadvantage, it's to support students and help them feel more supported, okay? And this could vary whatever you're doing in class. You could post a picture, you could, I don't know, post a podcast about a topic that you're studying. It depends what you're studying, okay? So for this example, we were focusing on an exam task. So I've posted an example video of students doing the exam task so that they can know what to expect. All right. So, starting the class, remember we talked about how important it is for students to feel relaxed so that they feel comfortable to talk, because that can be one of the main barriers in students not doing well in speaking, is that they're tense and they're stressed and they're nervous. So how can we make them feel more relaxed? So as students are joining the class, joining the meeting, encourage them just to have a chat. It doesn't even have to be about the lesson. As they join, ask them how they are, ask them what they've been doing. Try to remember personal details about them if you know they have siblings or you know of a particular hobby that they have. Ask them about it and engage them and make them feel important. It goes a long way, especially with teenagers, and a lot of our students who are preparing for these exams are teenagers, and so it's even more important. Icebreakers, somebody's put, that's a very good idea. Yes. So in order to get students talking, as more students are joining the room, you want them to start talking to each other and you'd like to step out a little bit. So what can you do? You can have a picture, you can have a GIF, you can post some general questions as I have here. Just, how are you doing today? What have you eaten? What have you watched on TV? And these can change every lesson. And as students get used to joining and talking to each other, you might not even need to put those questions up there anymore. And very importantly, at the beginning of the lesson, check that no one has issues with their audio, their video. Check they can access all their materials. This will make for a smoother lesson afterwards. Okay. So we've talked about scaffolding. Very, very important. This is just one activity that I have as a good idea for our speaking task. So please note that I've written instructions on my slide, and I also have an image there, again, to support students so that you can understand the instruction that I'm giving you. So my instruction is, listen carefully to my description and draw a picture. We're going to do this very quickly as a demo. Those of you that have a pen and paper, you can do this task and draw. Those of you that don't have a pen and paper, you can imagine the image in your mind, okay? Are you ready? Okay. There is a man and a woman standing in a garden behind a barbecue. There's a man and a woman standing in a garden behind a barbecue. They are both wearing aprons. I can see 2 plates of food next to them. Okay, we're going to stop there now. In the class, I would go into more detail and describe the picture in a lot more detail. I would also ask you to hold up your pictures and share your pictures with the rest of the class, which I can't do now because I can't see your cameras. So this is the picture. We would discuss the differences. How similar is yours? What did you miss? Okay. So why did we do this activity? First of all, it provides a model for students, okay? So by me describing the picture, I'm modeling the language that I want my students to use in the task. I'm giving them an example of how to describe a picture. It's also quite an engaging activity, students drawing. They often enjoy this activity, okay? And it gives them a clear reason to listen. They have to listen to me. If they don't listen to me, they can't do the activity. So it's a nice activity. However, it's quite teacher-centered, isn't it? So what can we then do afterwards to make it less teacher-centered and to personalize the activity? Remember that in our principles, we talked about the importance of making something less teacher-centered and personalizing an activity. How can we do that now? What would you do next after the teacher has modeled this activity? What would you do next? Let's see. I'm glad to see that lots of you like this idea. What would you do next? Irene, very good idea. Students could bring in their own pictures to describe to others. Fantastic. Students could go into breakout rooms in pairs and describe pictures to each other. Okay, you could analyze the picture for vocabulary. That is a good idea. Yeah, for if you want to develop vocabulary, that's a good idea to look at the picture in more detail. Okay, let's have a look. I think you've got all the same ideas that I have. So absolutely, tell students to bring their own picture. You could say, right, you have 2 minutes to go on the internet and find a funny picture related to celebrations, or depending on what your theme of the lesson is. You could tell them to look on their phone and find a picture. As you mentioned, students go into breakout rooms, and if you can safely monitor breakout rooms for your teenagers, then absolutely, it's a brilliant thing to do. Maybe your platform doesn't have a breakout room, so what could you do? So one idea is you could make a recording, ask students to make a recording and send it to their classmate or their teacher. So this is just one example of a tool. There are lots of others out there. You may have your own that you like to use, or students could even just use their phones to record a voice note and send it to their teacher or send it to their classmate. But this is great because you don't have to sign up for anything. You just go to the website, you click record, and you record your audio, your description of a picture, and then you can email it, or you get a link that you can send, okay? And the good thing about this is, number one, it takes students away from the screen. You can give students maybe 7 minutes or so to leave the meeting, do their recordings. They can have time to prepare. They can repeat their recordings, so they can do it once and they think, oh, I don't know if that was very good, I'm going to do it again. So they're recycling and they're practicing using the same language again, which will build their confidence and it will hopefully help them to improve their language, okay? They can send their favorite recording, the one that they feel most confident about, and they can send that one to their friend to draw and describe. And this activity is suitable for all levels. So we've looked at a B1 preliminary for schools task, but in the A2 key for schools task and the B2 first for schools exam, there are activities where students have to use pictures as prompts to talk. So this is relevant for students for all levels. Now, the last one, you see, I've put more feedback, teacher and peer. More feedback. How can we encourage peer feedback? Again, trying to take away from the teacher-centeredness. So one thing you can do is you can create success criteria, a grid for students to use to mark each other's work, to look at how their friends have done. So I've created this, and it's important that it's specific to the task that you're doing, okay? So I've used a combination of thinking about that particular task and using the speaking criteria in the Cambridge Assessment English handbooks for each exam. So all it is yes, no, not sure. So it's not too difficult. Students can decide whether their peer used a range of words to describe the picture. Did they use useful phrases? Okay. Now, the sophistication of your feedback will depend on the task and the level. If you're working with B2 first students, then you might have more criteria for them to look at, okay? And again, it's giving students a real reason to listen to each other. So first of all, they've listened and described their picture, and then they've listened and they have to grade them and say how they've done. That's much more effective than just saying, listen to your partner, how have they done? And they don't really know where to start. They might just say good or bad. This is much more meaningful feedback. Okay. Oh, I had a question there. Will everybody see the feedback? That's up to you. Okay. So you would send this individually to students, and they can either send it directly to the student, or you can ask them to post it on the platform for everybody to see. Maybe it's better to just send directly to the student, but also to the teacher, because the teacher has to be able to see it as well, okay? And the good thing about the recordings, one other thing, is you can send them to more than one student. Okay. So we've looked at a preliminary task. Now we're going to look at A2 Key for Schools Speaking Part 1. So what do they have to do in this task? They have to answer general questions, okay? And this particular task is about school. Now, again, in B2 First and also B1 Preliminary for schools, students have to answer general questions. So this is a similar task throughout the levels. It's just that the language of the level of the language will change in difficulty. So in this task, students need to know vocabulary about schools. Vocabulary about schools. So here is a task, and this has been taken from one of our new online teaching lesson plans, which I mentioned have been created, and I will show you where they are later. So in this activity, you're going to put students into pairs. So again, remember, we want students to interact without the teacher, and we want to give students a reason to listen to each other. And having a set structure to talk about makes it easier for students to think about their language. So you will put students into pairs. One student has half of the crossword, one student has the other half of the crossword, and you will in your lesson have probably stages leading up to this where you look at the vocabulary, ensure that students understand it, as well as maybe how to ask questions. So what you'll notice is in this activity, it's not just about the vocabulary, it's about asking those questions. So for example, what's 4 across? And then the other student has to paraphrase, which remember we said is a really important skill for the speaking exam, because if students have to talk about a picture or give a description and they don't know the word, doesn't matter as long as they know how to describe and paraphrase. So this is a really useful activity, again, that can be applied across the levels. It's about the skill, not the task, that we're focusing on here. Okay. So students can either go out into breakout rooms and they can answer the questions in pairs. Now, if your platform doesn't have breakout rooms, the lesson plans do give you alternatives for what you can do instead. And I've just seen a very helpful comment there about websites where you can create your own puzzles. And yes, there are lots of websites where you can create your own puzzles. So you can create this using specific vocabulary that you would like to include in your lesson. And you can use words from the Cambridge English word lists that are specific to each exam. Okay, so with that task in mind, let's have a look and a little think about feedback, okay? So thinking about the type of feedback that you might give in your online lessons, which do you find more useful, or which do you find easier as well? Is it immediate or delayed feedback and error correction? What do you tend to do in your online classes? Use the poll to answer. Use the poll to answer. That's very interesting. So at the moment, a majority of you are saying you find immediate feedback more useful, and about 30% delayed feedback more useful. Okay. That's very interesting, because lots of people are saying it depends, it depends. Of course it depends, it always depends. Oh, it's evening out a little bit more now. Okay, so about 30% of you say delayed feedback, and just under 70% say immediate feedback. Okay, that's very interesting to know. Because if there's a time lag and students are talking, so thinking about a speaking activity, it can sometimes be a bit difficult to give immediate feedback, because you're listening to students talk and then you perhaps go to reformulate what they're saying. And by the time you've reformulated it and giving them the correction, perhaps they've moved on a couple of sentences and then they don't know, they can't remember what they've said. So in some ways, delayed feedback can be perhaps a bit more useful in terms of motivating your students, because you don't want to put your students off and affect their concentration and their motivation. Okay, so again, I agree with you. It depends. It completely depends on the activity. Think about how best to give that feedback. Is it something you can do very quickly on the spot, or is it something that requires a little bit more thought? Let's have a look. So one thing that you can do, if your students are having a conversation and you don't want to interrupt the flow, you can listen and write down all the errors that you can hear, maybe on a Word document, a Google Doc. And then when the activity's finished, you can upload that document for all of your students to see. So here's an example of some errors that I heard in the activity. And the positive thing about this is that all of the students are looking at these at the same time, and you can give them time, okay? There's no rush. There's no correct this now, what's this? Students have to think on their feet. It's giving them time to really look at the sentences, think about how to correct them. They can do them in their notebooks, give them a few minutes, and then bring them together and get the feedback and go through why the errors are wrong. And actually, it's important to focus on positive language as well. So list phrases that you heard that were really good, that you would encourage students to use more, so that students are getting both aspects. They're getting positive feedback and constructive, meaningful feedback that can help them prepare from then on. Okay, so we've looked at lots of practical ideas that you can apply in your classrooms. And I've told you about some resources, and I've seen lots of questions appear. Where can we find these resources? So I'm going to show you now some of the resources that we have and where you can find them, and then we can have some questions, okay? So I talked about lesson plans. So these lesson plans have been created by Cambridge Assessment English, and these lesson plans have been created specifically to help teachers teaching online. So I'm showing you an example here. Like our regular lesson plans, you have a description, the materials required, and the procedure. So the step-by-step procedure that you would do in your classroom. Now you'll see on the right-hand side a new column called Online Options. So these give you ideas of how you can adapt what you would usually do in a face-to-face classroom in an online setting. And as I said, it might include some digital tools, some links to tools that you can use. It might just give you little ideas or things to bear in mind. Okay, and these are available for all levels from pre-A1 starters right up to C1 advanced. And because we are creating these as we go along, every week we are adding more plans. So if you look today and then look again in a week, you'll see that there are more plans have been added. So yes, I can see lots of questions. How do we find them? Good question. So if you go to Supporting Every Teacher, this is our landing page where we have all of our resources to help you with the adjustment teaching online. So if you go to this website, you'll see underneath this picture, you'll see another picture with a link to download our free resources. So once you click on download our free resources, you will get to a page that looks like this. So this is a very helpful resource finder. So you select the exam that you are teaching. So here I've put preliminary for schools. And then you select the resource you want. So here I've put in lesson plan. If you don't put lesson plan, then it will bring up all the resources that we have. So it just depends what you're looking for. So once you've clicked search, you'll see in the right, you get a list of the plans that come up. And you'll see that they're prefixed with online teaching. So you can see which plans have been created to help with online teaching and which are the regular plans. Okay, and these really are a useful resource that will help to give you confidence in preparing your students for our exams. So we're aiming to have a lesson plan for every single exam task for our B1 preliminary for schools and A2 key for schools and our young learner exams. So keep looking and you'll see that more appear every week. This is another resource for those of you who are teaching B2 first for schools. So these are self-access learning materials. I'm going to switch off my camera so that you can see what that says. So these are self-access learning materials for students. So at this level, students can have a bit more responsibility in their own learning. So you can direct them to these lesson plans and they can take them and they can work through them at home. And they include really useful study tips such as research and showing students how best to work through the exam. Okay, now you can use these in the classroom as well. If not, you can give them to students to do in their own time. So I really recommend that you have a look at those. And again, more are being added every week. Okay, so again, through that Supporting Every Teacher site, you can also access a free interactive support pack for teachers. And this includes links to all of our resources and gives you lots of advice and tips. And our partners at Cambridge University Press have a fantastic website, World of Fun, with lots of resources for young learners. And they have released their exam boosters for A2 Key, B1 Preliminary, B2 First, and C1 Advanced. So the link is on the slide, which will be sent to you. And these are books with practice tasks that you can use in your classes. Okay, before we move on, can you remember the 4 principles? Can you remember the 4 principles? Please type them in the box. There's a little test for you. What are the 4 principles that you're going to take from this webinar? Let's see if you can remember them. Okay, motivate, yes. Aha, lighten the load. Make it simple. Very good. You've all been paying attention. I'm very impressed. So these are the 4 main principles that you must not forget, okay? These will really help you in planning your classes and supporting your students to do really well in their speaking papers. Okay, so now please, if you have any questions, post them now if you have any questions at all. There were lots of questions about where to find resources, so I hope I've answered those now. Remember, if you can't remember, just type in supporting every teacher and it will take you to that landing page, and from there you can find all of our resources. Okay. Other questions about the slides? Yes, the slides will be available to you. And there are some questions about assessment. Okay, so a very good question, how to assess our students online. So we've touched briefly today in the webinar about peer assessment, giving feedback. We are developing some more webinars which focus specifically on assessment, and they will be coming later on in May. So please do have a look at the website for them to be advertised and you can sign up for them, okay? So this was the first webinar in our series about helping teachers prepare their students for their online, helping teachers prepare students for their exams while teaching online. So next week, there will be a webinar which focuses on writing and focuses on listening. And then the week after, there will be one that focuses on reading. So I really hope you can join us for those webinars as well. It's been wonderful to have so many of you here. Thank you very much. Bye.